Michael Madison, the execution of restraint fails. Michael Madison, a convicted serial killer behind the deaths of 3 women, encountered the full force of his victims' families' grief during his sentencing. As the prosecutor recounted the brutal details of Madison's crimes, the father of one of the victims sat visibly shaking, his hands clenched around the courtroom bench. When Madison responded with a smirk, the father lost control, rushing at him and landing several blows before being restrained by security. The already heavy atmosphere in the courtroom erupted into chaos as the father cried out, "You took my baby." His outburst, though swiftly subdued, came to represent the overwhelming sorrow and fury that often follow such horrific acts. For a man who had endured months of heartache in silence during the trial, the father's outburst came as no surprise to those who knew him. Family friends described him as a devoted and loving parent, shattered by the pain of Madison's crimes. Madison's smirk, perceived as either arrogance or indifference, was the final spark that ignited the father's rage. The attack left Madison visibly rattled, marking one of the few moments his otherwise emotionless facade cracked during the proceedings. Larry Nassar, a father's fury for his daughters. Larry Nassar, the disgraced former USA gymnastics doctor convicted of sexually abusing hundreds of young athletes, came to represent the ultimate betrayal of trust. During his sentencing hearings, a steady stream of survivors and their families delivered powerful emotional testimonies.
What kind of a person has the audacity to sexually assault a child in front of their mother?
Detailing the deep scars left by his abuse. One father, whose 3 daughters were among Nassar's victims, stood before the court to speak. Consumed by rage, he asked the judge for 5 minutes alone with Nassar. When his request was denied, he suddenly lunged at the defendant, yelling, "I'll take 1 minute."
Would you give me 1 minute?
You know that I can't do that. That's not how it is.
Well, I'm going to have to get something.
Security quickly intervened, but the incident laid bare the intense anguish and fury experienced by families devastated by Nassar's horrific actions. The father's outburst quickly became one of the most memorable and widely discussed moments of the trial. As he was restrained and led out of the courtroom, many observers empathized with his emotional reaction. The judge, while upholding the need for order in the courtroom, showed compassion by choosing not to press charges, acknowledging the overwhelming grief behind the father's actions. For the families of Nassar's victims, the incident served as a brief but powerful expression of collective pain and a symbol of the justice they longed for. Quinn Bowes, a family torn apart. Quinn Bowes was found guilty of killing his infant son, a tragedy that shattered his family. At his sentencing, Bowes stood motionless as the baby's mother broke down in tears in the courtroom gallery. Overcome with grief and rage, she suddenly lunged toward Bowes, screaming and striking at him. Though court officers quickly intervened, she managed to scratch his face, leaving marks behind. The emotional eruption underscored the profound anguish of a mother mourning the loss of her child, especially when the harm came from someone meant to keep him safe. Witnesses described the outburst as a raw display of uncontainable grief. Throughout most of the trial, the mother had stayed composed, but Bowes' emotionless demeanor at sentencing triggered an overwhelming surge of anger. Reactions in the courtroom were mixed. Some sympathized with her pain and saw the moment as justified, while others felt it disrupted the dignity of the legal process. Still, the incident left a powerful mark on all present, serving as a poignant illustration of the profound emotional toll of Bowes' crime. Dale Williams, rage unleashed in the name of justice. Dale Williams was found guilty of murdering a 17-year-old girl in Ohio, a heinous act that devastated her family and community. He ambushed the teenager and strangled her in a secluded location, a crime marked by its cruelty. During the sentencing, the courtroom was thick with emotion. The victim's father, shattered by grief and burning with rage, could no longer contain himself. As Williams stood emotionless, showing no remorse, the father suddenly lunged at him, letting out a guttural cry. Though security quickly intervened, he managed to land a punch to Williams' face. The outburst was a raw, instinctive attempt at justice, an expression of profound sorrow and the overwhelming drive to confront the man responsible for his daughter's death. As the father was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence, the air thick with emotion. Many in the gallery were visibly moved, some wiping away tears at the heartbreaking display of grief and fury. Quiet murmurs of sympathy for the father rippled through the room, while others sat speechless, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Dale Williams, however, remained expressionless, unshaken by the punch or the anguish he had caused. His cold indifference only fueled the family's pain, highlighting the stark emotional chasm between the man responsible and those left to mourn. Dwayne Smith, a family's anguish boils over. The murder of a child is an act that pushes the boundaries of human tolerance and forgiveness. Dwayne Smith, convicted of taking the life of a young girl, encountered the full force of her family's grief during his sentencing. As he sat smirking, void of any remorse, the girl's uncle, an imposing figure consumed by sorrow and fury, rose to his feet, unleashing a torrent of expletives. His voice, thick with years of suppressed anguish, rang out. "You took her from us, you monster!" That declaration shattered the fragile calm in the courtroom. Overcome by emotion, he clenched his fists and stormed past the security barrier, catching everyone off guard with his explosive outburst. As the uncle lunged at Smith, his fury was a force that couldn't be contained. Gasps filled the courtroom. Some spectators rose in alarm, others recoiled in shock, unsure of what was unfolding. Though security rushed to intervene, they weren't fast enough to stop the violent outburst. The uncle's fists connected with brutal intensity, striking Smith's face repeatedly. Chaos broke out as deputies scrambled to regain control. The sharp sound of blows landing echoed throughout the chamber, underscoring the unfiltered grief driving the attack. Smith, who moments earlier had worn a smug expression, was caught off guard. The arrogant smirk vanished as the punches forced him back. Blood trickled from his lip as officers finally subdued the enraged uncle, restraining him firmly and escorting him out in handcuffs. Though quickly removed, the scene left a lasting impression. Smith, now bloodied and visibly rattled, was led away by guards, his once defiant demeanor replaced by a hint of shaken vulnerability. The uncle's outburst was met with a mix of reactions. Some in the courtroom looked on with shock, while others quietly nodded in approval, understanding the profound pain behind the attack. The mother of the murdered child broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollably as her brother was removed from the room. For her, the attack was not just an act of vengeance, but a cathartic release of the anger that had consumed their family since the day they lost their daughter. James Douglas, the calm, shattered by violence. James Douglas stood trial for a string of brutal murders that had gripped the community in fear and fury. Throughout the court proceedings, he remained emotionless, showing no reaction as horrific details of his crimes were revealed. His cold detachment starkly contrasted with the raw grief of the victims' families, who were forced to relive their trauma through painful testimonies. On the day of sentencing, one victim's family occupied the front row, their anger barely contained. When the judge delivered a life sentence without the possibility of parole, Douglas let out a smirk, an expression that proved too much for the victim's brother, who snapped in a moment of uncontainable rage. Douglas's smirk was the breaking point. A chilling display of indifference that symbolized his utter lack of remorse and pushed the victim's brother beyond the limits of his grief. Unable to contain his anguish any longer, the brother vaulted over the courtroom barrier, driven by an explosion of emotion. He launched himself at Douglas, tackling him to the ground in a blur of fury. The two clashed violently, the brothers' fists fueled by heartbreak and rage, as though each strike was an attempt to undo the pain his family had suffered. Chaos erupted as security scrambled to intervene. But for those few moments, the courtroom, typically a place of law and order, was consumed by raw, human emotion. The structure meant to deliver justice was momentarily overwhelmed by the deep, primal need for retribution. Restrained and visibly trembling, the victim's brother cried out in fury, denouncing Douglas as a monster who deserved every ounce of pain. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, with some onlookers holding back tears while others exchanged solemn, empathetic glances, understanding the depth of his anguish. Douglas, bloodied yet largely unharmed, sat in silence, his smirk gone, but the cold indifference in his eyes unchanged. Vashon Flowers. A mother's grief turns violent. Vashon Flowers, convicted of a double homicide, remained expressionless throughout his trial, even as the victim's family shared heartbreaking accounts of their loss. His apparent indifference only heightened the emotional strain in the courtroom. When the verdict was finally delivered, the mother of one of the victims broke down in tears, her sorrow quickly turning into fury. Overcome with emotion, she rushed at Flowers, attempting to claw at his face while court officers struggled to restrain her. Chaos erupted as other family members became involved, some trying to pull her back, others driven by their own grief to confront Flowers themselves. The emotional eruption laid bare the deep, lasting trauma caused by his actions, pain that no legal outcome could ever truly resolve. Flowers flinched under the woman's assault, revealing a flash of fear for the first time since his arrest. As court officers pulled her away, she cried out, "You don't deserve to live." The emotional eruption left a profound impact on the courtroom. Many spectators were visibly shaken by the intensity of her grief. To those present, her outburst wasn't merely an act of retaliation, but a powerful, unfiltered expression of the pain and powerlessness that accompany the loss of a loved one to a brutal and senseless crime. These emotionally charged courtroom confrontations offer a powerful, unflinching look into the raw aftermath of unthinkable crimes. For many families, the formal legal process, structured, deliberate, and restrained, can feel inadequate in the face of unimaginable grief and loss. When the accused display arrogance, indifference, or lack of remorse, it often becomes the final trigger that transforms heartbreak into fury. Each outburst, whether a punch thrown or a desperate cry of anguish, is more than just a lapse in courtroom decorum. It is the eruption of bottled-up trauma, a primal reaction to profound injustice, and an assertion of humanity in the face of monstrous acts. These moments, while chaotic, serve as visceral reminders that behind every trial are families forever changed, carrying the weight of loss that no sentence can truly balance. In the end, these emotional explosions are not about vengeance. They are about visibility, about forcing the world, even for a fleeting moment, to witness the pain, the love lost, and the human cost of cruelty. They remind us that justice is not only measured in verdicts, but in the voices, sometimes shouted, sometimes sobbed, of those left behind.